Hi, and welcome to Grant Making. I'm guessing since you completed the syllabus quiz that you understand the logistics of the class in general, but there are a few things I just wanted to talk about face to virtual face. So the first question that I want to address is, why are there a few different assignments for graduate students? You're going to notice when you work through the class that there are some things in black. That's for everybody, undergraduate and graduate. There are a few assignments in red just for graduate students, and there's one assignment in purple that's just for undergraduates. The reason for this difference is that in order for our class to be accredited, the 4,000 and 5,000 level have to be different and sufficiently distinct. You guys can feel free to look at each other's assignments if you want to. I think you'll be equally capable of completing them. This was just a logistical, prosaic reason for this difference, but I wanted you to be aware of it. The next question that you might have is, why don't my lectures cover class readings? And what do you do if you have questions about the readings, lectures, or assignments? So I intentionally picked a very clear textbook that I think seniors and graduate students will be able to read without needing me to reiterate. My lectures are going to resonate with the things that you read. But if you have a question about the reading or anything else, if the question's specific to you and your own project, you can shoot me an email. If your question is more generally interesting to your peers, you can go to our open discussion board. So if you click on discussions, you'll notice that we have one discussion board that's not graded. It's called Open Discussion Board. You could go here and post questions that you think might be of general interest, or you could post articles that you read or things that you find that might interest the class. I hope that you guys will look here to see what questions I've answered publicly or to see what your peers have posted periodically throughout the semester. You might also be wondering, if my lectures do not discuss class readings directly, does that mean readings aren't that important? And the answer, you know I'm going to say no, but it's also built into the class. Starting in, I think, Module 3, my assignments are going to ask you explicitly to quote the reading. So you want to be very careful as you work through the class that you underline things, that you take notes, so that when I ask you to quote the reading, you can go back and cite page numbers specifically. This might seem like a hassle or one extra thing to do, but I want to remind you that in an online class, there's really no good way for me to tell who is completing and understanding the reading without assignments like this. And sometimes when things are written in a clear tone, like our own book, you might think you understand it, and then when I ask you to apply it, there might be a gap in understanding. So these assignments are really there so that I could catch potential mistakes before they happen and help you. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about our due dates. In a face-to-face class, due dates are really regular. If your class meets on Tuesday, Thursday, then you know your assignments are going to be due on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that in this class. There are too many times when you need to submit something and get feedback from a peer in time to write a next draft, or you need to get feedback from me. So our assignments are due on different days, unfortunately. I really encourage you, for this reason, to print out our syllabus like a checklist and check things off as you go, or you can make sure to enter all of our due dates into your personal calendar so you'll know when things are due, even though they're not on a particularly regular schedule. So now we get into the material, talking about grant writing. What does our culminating project look like? As the syllabus conveys, our entire class is built around a culminating assignment. I'm going to ask you to identify a real issue or project, identify or create an organization that can address that issue, and write a grant to an actual grant maker to fund that real or imagined project you work on writing all semester. So you might be wondering, what do you mean create an organization that can address that issue? Of course, I'm not expecting you to create articles of incorporation and start a new nonprofit, though you can do that if you want to. What I mean is that the organization that addresses your issue does not have to be real. You certainly may use this opportunity to reach out to a nonprofit that you care about and write a grant proposal to fund a real program. But you may also identify an issue that you care about and not have an organization that can solve that issue. And I still want you to write a grant on material that you care about just so you learn the format. Eventually, you might write grants for any number of organizations, but remember, this class is practice, and this is just one way to make it a little bit easier. I'm also allowing you to create your own organization because GrantMaker and Project Fit can be difficult to orchestrate. So GrantMaker and Project Fit is basically finding a funding body that wants to fund the type of program that you want and that is actually able to do so. So for example, I'm just going to introduce you to the difference between tax code 501c3 and 501c4. 501c3 is an organization that is tax exempt, and it confers that tax exempt status to people or organizations that donate money to it. A 501c4 is also a nonprofit, and it itself is tax exempt, but you don't get a tax benefit for donating to it. So you can see how if you're applying for a grant, somebody with $1 million is going to want to donate to a 501c3 instead of to a 501c4. And this affects local organizations like the Jacksonville Reentry Center. Because it's not a 501c3, it doesn't get the same opportunities for funding. By letting you come up with your own organization, you can kind of go around this issue and write a grant to a grant maker, get used to the process of writing it without those kinds of constraints. I'll remind you too that the amount of control that we're exercising over our subject matter is already a fiction. So you guys are going to design a project, and when you're actually writing grants for another organization, you're going to write about a project they already have. You're not going to be able to make the project better. You'll have to just write to make that project sound as good as possible. Of course, this is a little bit easier because you get to design a project that can be a perfect fit for a grant maker, and you might not get to do that in the actual case of grant writing, but this should be a really fun and sort of passionate way for you to get accustomed to writing grants so that you'll be able to do it in different contexts. Now you may be wondering, if we're developing our own projects, what is with the GrantMaker presentations? Why start these before starting our proposals? The reason for that is you can't write a grant without knowing the grant maker you want to write to. It's like a writer in any circumstance has to know his or her audience. So grant maker presentations teach you how to research grant makers, and then when you view one another's grant maker presentations, you're going to get to see a wide array of grant makers and hopefully inspire one another who to write for. You might also be wondering, why isn't my Google search for grant makers more productive? You should know, as Clippy is telling you here, grant maker is not a term of art. Our book might not have made it up, but it's not often used. So if you search for grant maker as one word and environmental issues, for example, you might not get very many hits. If you search for foundation or grant and environmental issues, you'll find more. I just wanted you to know that before you begin your presentations and you start looking to begin your projects. So the next thing I want to discuss is how to pick a grant maker to write about. I designed this little flow chart for you. I'm going to move myself down here so that you could see this a little bit. Where should I begin? So if you already have a project or a problem or a nonprofit in mind, then great. Start looking up who has funded that organization or similar initiatives in your area, and come up with a list of search terms to find those funders. Just pick one of them. That's who you might want to present on. If you don't already have any ideas for where to begin, you have two options. So you can look for an issue or an organization that matters to you, or one that relates to your professional aspirations. So if you want to be a librarian, for example, you can look for grants that our main library downtown is applying for. Or you can look for funding bodies. So you could just think, what grant makers have I heard of? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and research that grant maker and start there and go backwards. Now, of course, the grant maker presentation that you do does not have to be on the grant maker you ultimately write your proposals to. I have designed this assignment, as I said, specifically so that you guys can get ideas from one another, so that you can learn about a variety of grant makers before you get started, but this can just help you pick. So I just want to make a few final thoughts. I want to note that grant writing is not always written for organizations, even though that's what we're going to be doing in this class. The skills we practice in this class are going to transfer if you want to write grants or apply for fellowships to fund your own research, or if you choose to work for a city or for public works. There are different types of funding you might apply for. There are a few differences when you're applying for these different reasons. Government granting bodies, for example, have really strict rules, sometimes hundreds of pages of instructions for applying to those grants. But a lot of the things that we're going to talk about will apply to other sectors, and I'm going to try to do my best to indicate, here is a strategy that transfers to other circumstances. I also want to take a moment to note that granting funding opportunities can snowball, by which I mean before you apply to that $1.4 million grant, it's usually better and also easier to start applying for smaller things and then use those small opportunities to demonstrate that you have ethos and credibility as you apply to bigger things. So for example, I had a research fellowship at a very small museum called the Baffin Library and Museum in Minneapolis. I think researching there, getting that fellowship helped make me a good fit for applying to a Smithsonian Institution fellowship. And then I think getting that Smithsonian fellowship made me a good fit to win my National Science Foundation grant. I encourage you guys, if you can, to do the same things, to apply for small amounts first, and then you can show in your larger grants later that you had won awards and that you were successful at them, that you had good outcomes with your funding. So ultimately, the rhetorical strategies that we work on this semester are going to be useful to you, whether you're writing grants or fellowship applications or even abstracts or conference papers. I hope at this point that you start thinking about the foundations that you want to present on for your grantmaker presentations. I remind you finally to submit your list of grantmakers as soon as you can, because you guys all have to present on different grantmakers. So give me a list of possible grantmakers you want to write about when you get a chance, and I'll get back to you so you can start working on your grantmaker presentation. I hope you enjoyed our first lecture and our first module, and I can't wait to see what you guys present on. Bye!